There's a clear structure behind Iman Gadzhi's high-impact edits. It's not just aesthetic, it's intentional. In this video, we're gonna break it down step by step and recreate it from scratch. We'll start by building the first scene, focusing onto the bold layer and snappy motion design. Then, we'll dive into the 3D world with dynamic camera moves, objects, and dramatic lighting. And for the grand finale, we'll create a powerful closing scene that wraps everything up with cinematic impact. If you wanna go even deeper into editing style like this, let me introduce our brand new editing and motion design course, Edit Mastery Academy. Alongside the Iman Gadzhi breakdown, you will also get step-by-step viral editing courses using After Effects, Premiere Pro, and even CapCut. We'll talk more about that later in the video, but first, let's check out the final result.
What if the real game starts outside your comfort zone? Most people try, day after day, caught on the same loop. But the game only changes when you change the way you play it. First, show up. Handle your current commitments. Second, build. Stack skills that compound over time. And finally, launch. Put your offer into the world. Every choice you make is a coin flip toward your future. Most will fade, but one will change everything.
Alright, we are in After Effects, so let's start by creating 1920 by 1080 composition and call it main. And we'll import the Iman Gadzhi AI generated voiceover so we can build the animations on top of it. Let's right click, create a new solid layer and add a gradient ramp effect to build our main background for entire video. We're gonna set the first color to something like a dark red and the second one even darker, so we get a nice looking gradient background. Once we switch the ramp shape to radial ramp, for the cinematic vibe, I will drop the cropped PNG into the timeline. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and grab the type tool and write the first line of our title using the Rubik fold, which is what if the real game. And once align it to the center, place it up here. After turning on the 3D for the text layer, we'll add a gradient ramp effect. Set the first color to white and the second color to dark red. Then I will move the color points closer to the text layer so the gradient becomes more visible in the scene. Finally, I'm gonna add the glow effect, set the glow radius to 80 and the glow intensity to 0.3. Now let's open the text layer settings on the timeline, click animate and add position. Then click add and select opacity. Inside of the range selector, set the second position amount to 80 and set the opacity to 0. Then open the range selector settings, set the offset to -100 and add a keyframe. Move the playhead about 1 second forward and change the value to +100. Next, go into the advanced settings, switch the shape to ramp up and set ease high to 25%, ease low to 100% and that's it. And just like that, we got a nice text animation like this. Alright, let's duplicate the text layer and type out the second line, start outside your comfort zone. We'll also move the gradient color points to fit this one better. And finally, we're gonna move the second text layer further along the timeline so it starts in sync with the voiceover. And here is the final result. Now let's go ahead and build the second part of our scene. Let's grab the ellipse tool, turn on the fill, set the color to red and disable the stroke. Now we're gonna create a circle shape layer, not too small, not too big, and align it to the center. Then let's create a new camera layer, position those two layers on the timeline, and enable the 3D for the circle shape layer. Right click on the shape layer, go to the layer styles, and click on gradient overlay. Now head over to the gradient settings, open the gradient editor, set the first color to dark red, and go with a brighter tone for the second one. Next up, I will add bevel and emboss from the layer styles, set the depth to 50 and size 100. And finally, we're gonna add the inner glow effect from the layer styles. Open the inner glow settings, set the color to red, the choke amount to 30 and the size to 50. Let's move the playhead to second 4 and add a position keyframe to our shape layer and make sure it's centered. Then go back to the first frame and move it down outside of the scene until it's no longer visible. Now select the keyframes, set them to easy ease, and to zoom it out even more, head into Graph Editor and shape the speed graph like this. And that's our final result.
What if the real game starts outside your comfort zone?
Now it's time to change our scene. Let's go ahead and add a Gaussian blur effect to both text layers. Set the blur amount to 0 while the playhead is at this point on the timeline. Then also add an opacity keyframe and move the playhead about 1 second later and set the both blurriness amount to 60 and opacity to 0. By doing that, we can now move on to the next scene. Awesome. Now, from now on, things might get a bit more complex, so make sure to pay close attention. First, move the playhead to second 4 and add a scale keyframe to the shape layer. Then, about 3 seconds later, set the scale value to 170. After selecting the keyframes and converting them to easiest, duplicate the shape layer on the timeline, turn off the fill, open the stroke and set the stroke width to 6. Then remove all the layer styles we added to the shape layer as well as the scale and the position keyframes. Set the scale to 209, pick the rectangle tool, make sure tool creates mask is selected and start masking half of the circle shape layer carefully. Let's parent link the duplicated shape layer on the original one, then open the shape layer settings on the timeline and add trim path. Then open the trim path settings, set the offset to 90 and add a keyframe to the end property. Move the playhead about 3 seconds back and set the end value to 50%. After converting the keyframes to easy ease and smoothing them in the graph editor, we'll finish by adding the glow effect to the shape layer. Set both the glow radius and glow intensity to 100. Alright, let's start building the dots and the text layers. First off, let's duplicate the main circle shape layer and rename it to 1. Then remove the scale keyframes and set it to 15 and place it right here on the scene. I will open up the layer styles, head into inner glow, set the choke to 0 and size to 14. That way the glow stays visible on the circle. Then I'm gonna duplicate it 4 more times and place each one around the circle by adjusting their positions like so. And to move them together, simply select all of them and parent them to the main shape layer. Alright. Let's open up the animation composer by Mr. Horse. I will drop the link below so you can download it for free. Then just pick up this opener transition and apply it for all the circles. Next, we'll make the small circles show up one by one by shifting them on the timeline. That way each one pops up when the white line hits the same spot. Now let's go ahead and grab the type tool and write the first word for the circle, which is wake up. And after moving the text layer to this point on the timeline, enable 3D and parent it to the main circle shape layer. Then move the playhead to the start, add a Gaussian blur effect, set it to 50 and add a keyframe. Also add an opacity keyframe at the beginning and set it to 0. About 7 frames later, set the blurriness to 0 and opacity to 100. Before duplicating the text layer, let's also add a glow effect. Set the glow radius to 100 and the glow intensity to 10. Now finally, let's duplicate the text layer and update the lines to go to work, regular job, back to home and sleep. Then reposition them in the relevant places. And that's our final result. By doing that, we almost finished our first scene, but there is one last thing left. So let's go ahead and finish the final part. First things first, open the camera position settings and add a keyframe right at frame 1. Next, scrap to around second 7 and zoom in with the camera just like this. When the playhead is here on the timeline, I'm also gonna add an orientation keyframe. Then, just 1 frame later, I will zoom in extremely close to the third word by adjusting the position and orientation values on the camera layer. Then about 3 seconds later, I will slightly change the camera angle by adjusting the position value. And this is how it looks after the changes. Alright, let's move on to the text animation. First, duplicate the text layer and drop it just below in the scene. Then select the text, change it to build system and parent it to the original text layer on the timeline. Select the first layer, add a position and opacity keyframes. Then about 8 frames later, move it up so it takes the place of the old one. And add an opacity keyframe and set it to 0. Then select the new text layer, add an opacity keyframe, move the playhead 3 frames back and set the opacity value to 0. After that, let's make a scene transition look smoother by adding a Gaussian blur to a new adjustment layer. Then we're gonna move the playhead just before the scene changes and set the blurriness value to 22. Go 4 frames before the scene change and set the blur to 0. Then do the same 4 frames after it. That will give us a smooth, natural transition. And finally, let's add a glow effect to our adjustment layer, set the glow radius to 400 and glow intensity to 2. Now select everything except the voiceover and cropped PNG, pre-comp it and call it scene 1. If you wanna turn your editing skills to the next level, this is where it starts. I spent the last 6 months building a course for editors who wanna level up and earn by creating engaging videos. Inside the course, we start with the fundamentals of Premiere Pro, After Effects, and even CapCut. So no matter which program you're most comfortable with, you will learn how to use it with confidence. Once you pass the basics, it's time to explore the real power of these programs through hands-on masterclasses. You'll get step-by-step breakdowns of high-performing viral short-form edits, including a full section dedicated to Iman Gadzhi editing style you're watching right now. Over 80 in-depth lessons and more than 75 GB downloadable assets you can use right away in your own projects. Click the link down below in the description to check out Reddit Mastery Academy. Back to the tutorial, let's keep building. First up, let's create a new composition and call it Scene 2. Then go to the first composition, copy the background layer and paste it to our new composition. We're gonna grab the rectangle tool, turn off the fill, change its color to red and turn off the stroke. Now let's create a square to our scene and align it to the center. After that, turn on the 3D on the layer and change the render settings to Advanced 3D. Then we're gonna open the transform settings and set the X rotation to -84 and Z rotation to 45. Now open the geometry options and set the extrusion depth to 800. Then in material options, turn on the cast shadows and set specular intensity and metal to 60% each. Lastly, head into rectangle settings and set the roundness to 8. Perfect. So let's go ahead and create a new one-node camera layer. Turn on tool view and change the second view angle to custom view. Now I'm gonna duplicate the shape layer we created, change its Z position to 800 and place it above like so. Then duplicate it one more time and change its Z position to 1600 and move it up as well. Awesome. That gives our main stage setup. Now we'll take it further and start adding a bunch of elements. So let's start with the camera position. I'm gonna add a position keyframe at the first frame on the camera layer. Then, about 11 seconds later, I will adjust the camera position until we get very close to the third shape layer. Now select both keyframes, set them to easy ease, and tweak the speed graph in the graph editor, just like this. Now let's grab the type tool and write 1 using the Rubik Extra Bold font. Turn on 3D and place it right here, using the 2-view layout to help with positioning. Now go into the geometry options, set extrusion depth to 10, then head into material options and bump the specular shyness up to 75%. Let's duplicate it and place it on top of the second shape layer. Then change the text from 1 to 2. Duplicate it one more time, place it on top of the third shape layer and change it to 3. With all camera movements and setting up the structure, our scene is finally coming to life. Now let's go ahead and import our 3D objects. First, let's bring in the computer desk 3D object. Hit the make comp size and shrink it a bit. Then just zoom in and drop it on top of the first shape layer like so. Next, bring the second 3D object, the workbench. Make it smaller and drop it on top of the second shape layer. And finally, import the last 3D object, which is the NASA Space Shuttle. Place it on top of the third shape layer, then duplicate it and position the copy next to the text layer. I'm also gonna duplicate the text layer, place it here and change the text to launch. Then reduce the font size and place it in front of the space shuttles just like this. Awesome. Let's go ahead and create a new spotlight by adjusting the intensity amount to 250. Using the 2-view layout, we're gonna position the spotlight above the first shape layer so it only lights up that area. Then I'm gonna duplicate the spotlight on the timeline and move it on top of the second shape layer like so. And finally, duplicate it one more time and place it above the third shape layer as well. So let's select all the spotlights and add an intensity keyframe. Move those keyframes to second one and set the intensity to 0 at the first frame. And we're gonna move these spotlight layers further along the timeline and reveal them one by one as the camera travels across the shape layers. And after doing that, here is the final result. Now let's grab pen tool, close the fill, turn on the stroke and set the stroke width to 2. We're gonna draw out this path by using pen tool from starting just behind the 1. Next, open the shape layer settings, go into stroke 1, add some dashes and set the dash value to 20. And to create the animation, go to add and select trim path. Now let's open the trim path settings, move the playhead here on the timeline, set the end value to 0 and add a keyframe, and 1 second later set it back to 100%. And finally convert the keyframes to easy ease and turn on the 3D. Let's also turn off all the shadow and light options for the path, that way the spotlights won't affect it. Alright, time to add the text layers. Once you type the first one, turn on 3D, go into material options and switch off all the light and shadow settings. To make the text easier to see, I will just make the path a bit smaller and drop the text layer right here. Then we're gonna add an opacity keyframe at the second one and set it to 0, and about 10 frames later set it back to 100. And here is how it looks so far. Perfect. So I'm gonna select the text and the shape layers on the timeline, duplicate them and move them next to the second bar. Then select the trim paths keyframes from the shape layer and remove them. Since we changed the position of the path, we now need to add a keyframe to start value. Set it to 0 and about 10 frames later, set it back to 100. Lastly, let's change the second text to say build and position it just like this. And by doing that, we've wrapped up our second scene. And this is how it looks. Great, now let's go back to the main composition and move the second scene composition to the main one. Move the comp over here, add an opacity keyframe, set it to 0 and bring it back to 100 about 10 frames later. Now let's add some Iman Gadzhi effects. First, we're going to create a new adjustment layer and add a noise effect by setting the noise value to 12. Then I'm gonna add a posters at time effect and set it to 12 as well. And this is the final result.
What if the real game starts outside your comfort zone? Most people try day after day caught on the same loop, but the game only changes when you change the way you play it. First, show up. Handle your current commitments. Second, build. Stack skills that compound over time. And finally, launch. Put your offer into the world.
Everything we've done so far has led to this moment. From layout to animation, we set this stage. And now it's time to watch the final scene. The moment where everything connects and speaks for itself. Let's make things easier by starting with the second part. Go ahead and create a new composition called Scene 4. Then let's copy the background layer from the previous composition and paste it into the new one. Now to create a 3D coin layer, we'll grab the ellipse tool, turn off the stroke, enable the fill and change the color to dark red. After creating the circle shape layer, align it to the center, enable 3D and make sure the render settings is set to advanced 3D. Then go to the geometry options, increase the extrusion depth to 20, change the bevel style to convex and set the bevel depth to 10. And finally, open the material options and set the specular shyness amount to 100. Now let's go ahead and set the Y rotation to 90, then adjust the Y anchor point so the circle is positioned like this. Then duplicate the shape layer and set the Z orientation to 30. From this point on, keep duplicating and increase each copy's Z orientation by 30 until you get this look. After finishing this process, I'm going to create a new null object and parent all the shape layers to it. Then we'll add a Z rotation keyframe at the first frame and about 9 seconds later, set it to 45. Let's also give the null object some scale movement, set the keyframe here at 75 and around 6 seconds later, bump it to 80. Then select all the shape layers, press R on the keyboard, add a Y rotation keyframe and set it to 90 when the playhead is at that point, and 3 seconds later, set it to 35. Once you ease the keyframes and tweak the speed graph to smooth it out, that's it. The second part of the final scene is done. And finally, it's time to make the first part of the final scene. First, we're gonna copy one of the circle shape layers. Then, we'll create a new composition called Scene 3 and paste it inside. Let's also copy the background layer as well and place it right below of the shape layer. Then I will remove all the keyframes that I created and set the scale amount to 150. Next, place the anchor point to the center, change the X rotation value to 90, also change the Y rotation value to -95, and add a keyframe at the first frame. Then move the playhead here on the timeline and increase the Y rotation value like so. After converting the keyframes to easy ease and adjusting the speed graph, this is the animation we get. Now let's move the playhead to the second two and add a position keyframe. At the first frame, move the object down until it's no longer visible. After adjusting the graph editor, here is the final result. Perfect. Now let's go back to our main composition, drag the Scene 3 composition into the main composition, and start it from this point on the timeline. I will add some opacity keyframes to make this scene transition feel smoother. Then, for the final scene, we'll bump the frame rate from 12 to 24. Let's also move the scene 4 on the main composition and give it the opacity keyframes as well. And our final step is gonna be creating the text layers on the scene. Let's grab the type tool and write our first line to the left. Then change the font, make it smaller and place it right here on the scene. I will open the text layer with some Gaussian blur and opacity together. In 1 second, reduce the blurriness from 60 to 0 and increase the opacity from 0 to 100. Then add a glow effect to the text layer to give it more visual emphasis. And set the glow radius to 15. Awesome. So let's duplicate the text layer, move it to the right and replace the text with the new one. And that's wrap for this video.
What if the real game starts outside your comfort zone? Most people try day after day caught on the same loop, but the game only changes when you change the way you play it. First, show up. Handle your current commitments. Second, build. Stack skills that compound over time. And finally, launch. Put your offer into the world. Every choice you make is a coin flip toward your future. Most will fade, but one will change everything.
Don't forget to check out our brand new course, Edit Mastery Academy, link in the description. Thank you for watching again, and I will see you in the next one.